all the different. All right, we'll say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, Hilton Mishpach of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shumer Drushos this year as a zuchus for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Av, Haba Alinu Latova, Stephen, Wendy Drazen, in honor of their parents, Israel Drazen, Dina Drazen, Eileen Rosenzweig, and Stanley Rosenzweig, Zichron Livracha. Our week of learning sponsors, Abby and Joe Hirsch, with appreciation to the entire Kehillah, and a schus for the Chayalim and for all of those sacrifices for Klal Yisrael. And our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, David and Elizabeth Green, in memory of David's grandfather, Bernard Green, Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Shama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, all those in need of refuah, Shav, and together the Kol Chol Yisrael, this Baruch Hashem, bring home our hostages, b'shalom and b'karov, and allow our holy soldiers to be successful. B'chol Maaseh Yedehem. All right, Jabot, say let's get started. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem, an incredible daf ahead of us in Meretz Hashem. Today's daf is Mem Gimel 43. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem at the Mishnah. I have a lot to do on Mem Beis and Beis 42. Bihamotzi Kelim, Valeim Tzuras Chamot, Tzuras Lavana, Tzuras Darkon. So if a person finds utensils, and on those utensils, ultimately again he finds an image of the sun, an image of the moon, and an image in Darkon is a dragon. A dragon. So the Gemara says, what's the halacha? Yolichem v'yam hamelach. You have to go ahead and literally throw it into the Red Sea. Now, the Dead Sea, I should say. Now remember again, that's an expression. Yolichem v'yam hamelach means you can't get any benefit from it, and you pretty much have to destroy it. So Rabbi Shmuel Silber. So now again, we'll say, what do you see from this? So remember again, we're slowly but surely building up our Avoda Zara information. So remember again, so far what we've seen throughout our journeys over here is the notion of you find slumim, are images. Images, what's the issue? I don't know again, is it Avoda Zara? Not Avoda Zara, right? So that's the issue. I don't know how was it worship, was it not worship? As opposed to we'll call it Shivrei Avoda Zara, where I find pieces of actual Avoda Zara that was worshipped. In this category over here, what the Mishnah is introducing us to is there are certain images which are always idolatrous in nature. So you go ahead and you find utensils, and on those utensils are the images of a sun, a moon, a dragon. Ultimately, again, it's Avoda Zara. It's almost with absolute certainty, it is with certainty Avoda Zara. Shmuel says, it depends. What are you finding the image on? Sha'al mechubadin asurin, sha'al hamavuzin mutarin. If you find it on what we'll call a respectable kli, a bakavadik kli, a utensil, then ultimately again it's avodah zara. And a non-bakavadik kli, then ultimately again it's not avodah zara. Now what that means, what the definition of a respectable kli, a non-respectable kli, that we'll see in the Gemara. So let's says this. Now it makes it sound like over here that it's only to these images that people pray, that people worship, but to other images, ultimately, again, they don't worship. The Gemara says, is that true? So in other words, what the Mishnah seems to be saying is if you see an image of the sun, the moon, a dragon, that's certainly something that people worship. By inference, other things people don't worship. Is that true? Or minhi, hashochet l'shum yamim, l'shum naros, l'shum midbar, l'shum chama, l'shum levana, l'shum kochav mazalos. So listen to this. If a person goes ahead and shechts an animal, and when he shechts that animal, he does it with the intention to do it for the rivers, the desert, the sun, the moon, the stars, the constellations. L'shum Michael Sar HaGadol, for Michael, the master of the sea. L'shum Shul Katan, even to a tiny little insect, tiny little worm. Hare'elu Zivche Mesim. This is considered to be Avodah Zara. Now, what do you see from here? Pretty much, you can worship anything. You can worship anything. And in fact, people do worship anything. So as such, why does the Mishnah seem to limit worship to these particular images, just of the sun, the moon, and the dragon? To which the Gemara says, Rabbi, this is very interesting. Miflach l'kol d'meshachi polchi. The truth is, Rabbi says, when it comes to worship, ultimately, again, of the Avodah Zara, will worship everything. They'll worship anything and everything. Meitzar umefalchi, but when it comes to putting an image of something on a utensil, so both say, to worship is easy, right? Because you can worship anything. But to take the time to actually put an image on a utensil, there's only certain images that they're going to use. Hani tlasa de chashivi, tsari lehu upachi lehu. So again, these three mentioned in the Mishnah, namely the sun, the moon, dragon, that's chashuv enough that people will take the time to put that on a kli and pray to it. But ultimately, again, with other images, if you find that on a utensil, at the end of the day, that is just for decorative purposes. So again, a very interesting distinction over here. So therefore, the Gemara is suggesting is like this. The fact that people make things into Avoda Zara, people make everything into Avoda Zara. Okay, that's fact number one. When it comes to putting things on a utensil, it's only the three items mentioned in the Mishnah, the sun, the moon, and a dragon, where people will take the time to go ahead and put that on a utensil and worship it. Everything else you find on a utensil is really just for decorative purposes. Incredible. Mankit Rav Sheshes Chumri Masnisa Vatani. So Rav Sheshes used to take interesting ideas from a mission. He would teach it. He would say the following: Kol mazalos mutarin chutz mi mazal chama ulavana. All mazalos. In other words, if you find any other pictures of any other constellations or celestial bodies, ultimately on a utensil, it is mutter, with the exception of the sun and the moon. Again, reinforcing this idea that the sun and the moon often are used for Avoda Zara purposes. Similarly, again, if you find any faces or any images on a utensil, all of it is mutar, chutz mi pirtzof adam, with the exception of the image of man. Right, the image of man, by definition, represents Avoda Zara. V'chol hatzuros mutaros chutz mitzuras darkon. And in general, all images are permitted, with the exception of the image of a dragon. Amar Mar, kol mazalos mutarin chutz imazal chama. So interestingly enough, the Gemara says, we said before that all of the mazals, you could draw any of the celestial bodies, with the exception of the sun and the moon. The Gemara says, what's the case over here? If you're actually like making this, in other words, if we're talking about somebody who's actually making this image, so the Gemara says, one second, are you allowed to make images of any of the celestial bodies? After all, we'll get into this more. Lo sasun iti. The pasuk says, Lo sasun iti. Literally, again, do not make with me. Now, again, the rest of the pasuk over here is Lo sasun iti, Elohei kesef, Elohei zav, Lo sasulachem. Don't make with me. In other words, don't make alongside of me gods made out of gold or silver. The Gemara says, Lo sasun kidmos shamashai hamashamshin lefonai b'marom. There is a specific law that HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts forward. Do not make images of the other bodies, the other hosts that, so to speak, dwell alongside of me in the heavens. The Gemara says, what this means is, again, what the Gemara is saying is, you cannot make replicas of the sun, the moon, and the stars, as ultimately, again, that represents a little bit of Avoda Zara. Ella, pshita b'moses. Therefore, we can't be dealing with someone who's constructing it, because constructing it sounds like it would be aser. Rather, what are we talking about? We're talking about someone who finds these images. As the Mishnah said, we're talking about someone not who's making these images, but who finds these images. So if you find the kli, and on that kli is an image of the sun, the moon, the dragon, you have to get rid of it. So, one second. Here's the issue. If we're talking about a case where someone's finding this utensil, what about the middle of the brisa? What was the middle case of the brisa? Kala pertsufos mutarin. All images of living creatures are mutar, chutz mi pertsuf adam, with the exception of the visage, right? With the exception of the visage, the image of man. The Gemara says, well, one second. Ibe motze pirsuf adam miaser. Say if we're talking about a motze, if we're talking about a case where a person is finding this, so would it be prohibited to keep something, a utensil that has the image of a man on it? After all, Vatnan, Hamotzi Kelim, Valim, Suras, Chamos, Suras, Lavana, Suras, Darkon, Yolichim, Yamamelech. What did the Mishnah say? If you find the utensil, and on the utensil is an image of the sun, the moon, a dragon, you have to throw it into the Dead Sea. The Gemara says, Suras, Darkon in Pirts of Adam, lo. What do you see from here? It's only the image of a dragon or sun on the moon. That's problematic. But the Mishnah makes no mention of the visage or an image of man. Ela pshita ba'oseh. Rather, Rabbi say it is pashut that the Bryce is talking about a case of someone who's actually fashioning this utensil. And reflexively, Rabbi Yeshua. Gemara says I ba'oseh. But if we're talking about a case of constructing the utensil, emos sefer. Look at the end of the Bryce. Kalatsuros mutaros chutz mitzuras darkon. All images are permitted except for the image of a dragon. Ve'i ba'osa, and if we're talking about creating it, suras darkon mi aser, ultimately, again, with the image of a dragon be prohibited. After all, v'haksiv, I will say last line, mem beis, amud beis, v'haksiv, lo sasun iti, Elohei kesef, velohei zahav. Top of Mem Gimel, 43a. Hani in. So what do you see from here? It's dafka again, these images which are problematic. Suras darkon lo. But ultimately, again, the image of a dragon is not problematic. Ella pshita b'motzi. Rather, what are we talking about over here? Where ultimately someone is finding this particular image or this particular utensil. To which the word says, "Ukidisnan hamotzi kilim valem tzuras chama." And again, as the Mishnah itself said, if you go ahead and you find utensils, and on the utensil ultimately again is the image of the sun. To which the Gemara says, Mem Gimel without 43a, 3 lines down from the top. Hareisha v'seifa b'moses. So it must be the first case and the second case of the Reisa are talking about someone who finds a utensil. Umitziasa ba'oseh. And the middle case of the Reisa is talking about someone who actually fashions it. Amar Abaye in Reisha v'seifa b'moses. Umitziasa ba'oseh. Yeah. So we'll say as much as we don't like setting up a Brisa that way, that seems to be the way the Gemara is going to set up the Brisa. The Reisha and the Sefer are talking about a case of a person who's finding this utensil. And the middle case of the Reisha is talking about a situation of someone who is making this utensil. Rava disagrees. Rava Amar Kula b'motze. Not true. This entire Brisa is talking about a situation of someone who's finding a utensil. Umitziasa Rabbi Yehudihi. And the middle case of the Brisa is Rabbi Yehuda. What does Rabbi Yehuda say? Desanya Rabbi Yehuda Mosif Af Dumus Menika V'Sar Apis. So this is very interesting. Rabbi Yehuda adds on to the list of prohibited images. He adds on the image of a nursing woman and Sar Apis. Okay, so we'll say, so take a look at Rashi. What's Sar Apis? Second line down from the top of Rashi. Sar Apis, Shesar V'Na'aseh Sar. So this is talking about someone who at first, it's the image of someone who was a commoner, and then ultimately again became someone chashuv, became a sar, became someone who is important. Or in other words, someone, or translated a different way, someone who became important and took the world along with him, who had a dramatic impact on the world. We're going to see what that is. The Gemara says, what does this mean? The Gemara says, Menika Hashem Chava, Menika Kala Olam Kulo. It's interesting that people say sometimes people would make an image of a nursing woman. If someone made an image of a nursing woman, it was a form of Avoda Zara. Who were they idolizing? Chava, right? Why did it represent Chava, the first woman? Because, so to speak, she nursed the world into existence. What's Sar Apis? Hashem Yosef. Very interesting. This was an idol, or this was an image, an idolatrous image of Yosef. Why Yosef? The Gemara says, Shesar Umafis es kol ha'olam kulo. Because Yosef himself, ultimately, again, when he went ahead and became the viceroy of Egypt, he brought the world, or he brought society up with him as well. So we'll say, isn't this very interesting? So Rabbi Yehuda, in addition to the sun, the moon, the dragon, Rabbi Yehuda goes ahead and says there are other images where if you see them, they are idolatrous. So again, interestingly enough, the image of a nursing woman. Now I will say, now what's fascinating about this is, the image is of Chava, but remember, you could take anything and turn it into Avoda Zara, right? The person could take an image of Moshe Rabbeinu and turn it into Avoda Zara, right? So again, so they would take an image of Chava, or Yosef. Yosef is fascinating that Yosef was idolized. When I say idolized, I mean the process of making into an Avoda Zara, right? Making into an idol. He was literally, again, idolized because, again, he represented this power this power to go ahead and rise up from difficult circumstances and not only lift yourself up, but lift the world up as well. Incredible. So who did not get Giruya the Kakayo? In the Yosef case, what we call with the Avoda Zara was called Sar Apis. That's what it was called. That was an image of Yosef, whatever, an image of man, and he was holding a measure and measuring. That was the image of the Avoda Zara. The Gemara says, "V'hi dinakta bein v'kamanika." And similarly, again, in the case of the nursing woman, obviously it's an actual image of a woman nursing her infant child. Incredible. All right, let's go right there. So, Tan Rabbanon, Ezehu Tzuras Darkon. What is this image of a dragon, right? What is this image of a dragon? That is Avoda Zara. So Gemara said, "Perish Reb Shimon Elazar kol sheyish lo tzitzin bein parakav." It's any image, some obviously reptilian image that has fins coming out of its vertebrae, right? So it's got like I guess fins is the right word, fins coming out of his vertebrae. So Gemara says, "Machvi Ravasi bein pirkei sav." Ravasi disagreed. He says not really out of the vertebrae, but out of the neck. Out of the neck. Rabbi Chanina, halacha Rabbi Shmuel Silber. The halacha is like Rabbi Shmuel Silber. So therefore, again, the image of a dragon that's problematic is this reptilian creature with fins coming out of its vertebrae. Incredible. So where it goes weiter. Pamachas, listen to this, it's a great story. Pamachas hayisi mehalech achar Rabbi Elazar akafar beribi b'derech. So listen to this. Rabbi Shmuel Silber says like this. One time, I was walking after Rabbi Elazar on the road. What happened? Umatza sham tabas va'aleha tzuras darkon. And Rabbi Elazar found a ring, and on the ring was an image of a dragon. Okay. Umatza obed kochavim katan, right? V'lo amar lo klum. And then what happened? He came across a young akum, and he did not say anything to the young akum. Okay, so we're going to see what he wants to do. Matzah obei kochavim gadol. Then he came across an adult akum, va'amar lo batla, and he said, "Do me a favor, negate this avodah zara." Suppose I remember again. This goes back to yesterday's daf, right? Or I should say yesterday, 2 days ago as well, where again the concept that an akum and only an akum can be mevatel, can negate an avodah zara. Now again, I will say this is actually a good moment to pause here because I just realized I did not give you the halacha l'maisa from Mem Aleph. So remember again, in our bittul avodah zara, when we were introduced to that, we had a raging machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Remember again, what was that machlokes? Does decommission of avodah zara have to be active? Right? Do you actively have to negate it? Or can there even be passive nullification of Avoda Zara? So Rabbi Yochanan says it has to be active. Reish Lakish says it can even be passive. So remember again, what was the Nafkamina case? The Avoda Zara falls over and breaks on its own. Is that Avoda Zara batal or not? Reish Lakish says yes. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Just so you should know, the Rambam Paskins in Hilchos Avoda Zara, and this is very important, the Rambam Paskins, Hilchos Avoda Zara, Perek Ches Halacha Yud Aleph, Avodas Kochavim Shenishbara Me'eleha, Shvareha asurim bana ad shivatluha. So Rabbi says, so interestingly enough, so halacha l'maisa, the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yochanan, that in order to be mevatel avodah zara, there has to be an active nullification. So therefore, if the idol falls over on its own, the pieces are still going to be asur. Lefichach hamosi shivrei avodas kochavim hari elu asurim bana shema lo bitluha ha'ovdei kochavim. So the Rambam literally paskins like Rabbi Yochanan, and this is important actually for this story. Rabbi Yochanan, that nullification requires active nullification. You need an akum to actively nullify that avodah zara. Okay, so back to our story. Rabbi Elazar HaKafar is walking. He finds a dragon ring. Who doesn't like finding a dragon ring, right? So he finds a dragon ring. What's the problem? Dragon ring is avodah zara. So he passes by a young akum, doesn't say anything. He passes by an adult akum. He says, "Hey, akum, do me a favor, be mevatel this ring for me." V'lo bitla, and the akum didn't do it. Satru, so Rabbi Elazar slapped him. Rabbi Elazar slapped him, right? Ubatla. And then he decided to be mevatel it. It's old school. That is old school, right? That's how we threw it down in the day, right? So he slapped him, and the akum was mevatel it. Okay, so Gemara says, Shma mina tzlas. We can learn 3 things. We can learn many more than 3 things from this story, but for our purposes, we're going to learn 3 things. Number 1, Shma mina ovei kochav mevatel avodas kochavim shalo v'shal chavero. Lesson number 1. is an akum has the power to be mevatel his avodah zara and someone else's avodah zara. Because remember, again, both say this dragon ring had nothing to do with the adult akum that Rabbi Lazar ran into, right? In other words, it wasn't his ring. It wasn't his ring. So you see from here that an akum has the power to be mevatel any form of avodah zara. His avodah zara, someone else's avodah zara. That's lesson 1. Number 2, shmamina yodea betiv shavodas kochav umisham shablasu mevatel v'she'en yodea betiv avodas kochav umisham sha ein mevatel. In order to be mevatel avodah zara, you have to understand avodah zara, right? Therefore, what? Therefore, now you understand the first part of the story. Rabbi Lazar, when he came across the young akum, right, the minor akum, the child akum, he didn't ask him to be mevatel it. Why? Because a child can't do bittul. Right? A child can't nullify avodah zara because a child, again, Rabbi say, a katan doesn't have das. So because a katan doesn't have das, therefore halacha l'maisa, he cannot be mevatel the avodah zara. That's lesson 2. And shmamina oved kochavim mevatel bal karcho. Now we'll say again, all kidding aside, what we learned from the whole slap thing is that Rabbi Lazar physically compelled him to be mevatel the avodah zara, and it worked. It worked. So you see from here that bittul, even under compulsion, right? So bittul, even forced negation of avodah zara, in fact, does work. Incredible. Also a fascinating story. Rabbi Chanina was surprised about this, and he said, what about the following issue? So again, Rabbi Chanina was surprised by this story, and he said, didn't Rabbi Lazar forget about a very crucial piece of information? This nan, hamatzal min hari, umin hadov, umin hanamar, umin hagayis, umin hanar, umizuto shalyam, umishloliso shalnar. So we'll say, so this is talking about, again, a person goes ahead and saves an avodah, a piece of avodah zara from a lion, from the bear, from the leopard, from robbers, from the river, from a raging sea, from the current of the river. Vamotzi bisracho placha gidola, or for that matter, again, he finds avodah zara in a public, literally again in the stadium, right? In the stadium or in the marketplaces. Or ultimately, again, or any place where the public is found. Hari elu shalo. Ultimately, again, these items become inevitable. Now, again, just understand, this is talking about a general situation, right? Person goes ahead and saves something from the lion, from the bear, from the leopard, from the raging sea, from the depths of the sea, or in a public place. These are all situations, Rabbi Sevarat, where if someone loses an object in this context, generally, what's the halacha? They have yeyosh, right? They despair of retrieving the object. They're not going to get it back. So therefore, in all of these cases, harei shalo, the finder gets to keep the object. Why? Because again, the owners have yeyosh, right? The owners have no realistic expectation of reclaiming this lost object. So the Gemara says, so what's the question, so what's the shaila? What's the shaila? So shaila over here is, Belazar, you're finding a dragon ring, right? And now what's happening over here? You picked up the dragon ring. Now the Gemara says as follows. Now it's interesting, by the way. Rashi points out over here, matzat tzabas v'lo higbia ad shabbat la'avei kochavim. So Rashi understands the case over here is Rabbi Lazar ultimately again did not pick up the ring. Now why didn't he pick up the ring? Why didn't he pick it up? Why not? This goes back to yesterday's daf. What happens if a Jew would pick up the ring potentially? He acquires it. Once he acquires it, then it's avodah zara belonging to a Jew. Once it's avodah zara belonging to a Jew, then what? No bittul. You can never nullify that. So therefore, the case over here is, just understand what's happening over here. Rabbi Lazar himself never picked up the ring. He found it. He's standing there by the ring. Little akum comes along. He doesn't say anything, right? Because little akum can't do bittul. Big akum comes along. Be mevatel it. No, slap, yes, bittul. Okay, now the Gemara asks, but I don't understand. There's a different issue over here. Don't we assume that there was yeyosh, right? In other words, someone lost the dragon ring, right? Someone lost the dragon ring. Bepashtos, where is he losing it? Rishus Harabim. So now Rabbi Lazar finds it. Now in general, so shouldn't we assume the owner lost it? He lost it in the public place, which means he gave up hope of ever recovering it. There's yeyosh. I will say, now listen to this. What the Gemara is asking is, shouldn't yeyosh effectively create bittul? shouldn't that effectively create bittul, right? In other words, if we'll call it Akum owned the dragon ring, he lost his dragon ring, he despairs of ever retrieving it, shouldn't that in itself be mavatal the Avoda Zara? Right? Shouldn't that be the nullification of idolatry? To which the Gemara says, no. Again, Abaye says, look, obviously he may have despaired of ever retrieving it, but that doesn't negate the idolatrous import of the item. In other words, that someone else will find it and worship it. After all, he says, Meimar Amar, the owner of the dragon ring says like this, I don't really have much hope that I'm going to find my dragon ring again, but one of the two things will happen. A non-Jew will find it, and if another Akum finds it, he'll worship it. And if a Jew finds it, ultimately, again, dragon rings apparently were very expensive, right? So therefore, again, a Jew will find it, and what will he do? He'll sell it to an Akum. So interestingly enough, as much as there is Yeush in this case, the Yeush doesn't result in a bittul of the Avoda Zara, right? The Yeush says, the owner, despair of getting it back. But the theological identity, ultimately, again, of this item is still intact. That's why Rabbi Lazar still needed an Akum in order to go ahead and actively negate the Avoda Zara. Fascinating. Okay, the Gemara goes weiter. So it's not Hassam. So I'll say now again. So remember, in the Mishnah itself, one of the images that it seems to be everybody agrees with are the celestial bodies, right? The sun and the moon. But the Gemara raises an interesting kasha. Tanan Hassam, we learned over there, Masechas Rosh Hashanah, Demus Tzuros Levanos, Hayu Lo Rabbi Gamliel Bal Yasal, Betavla Bakosal. Listen to this. Rabbi Gamliel had images of the moon in his attic. He had images of the moon. Why did he have images of the moon? Shebahen Mares had yotos for Amrlahan Kazari Isem O Kazari Isem. When people would come to testify about that they saw the new moon, what would happen? Rabbi Gamliel would bring them into his study. He had images of the moon on his wall, and he would say, "Tell me, what did it look like?" And this is how he would test the Eidim to see if they were telling the truth or not. So the Gemara says, "Whoa, Umishari, are you allowed to do that? Are you allowed to have images of the moon? Vaksi, but the pasuk says, Lo sasun iti. So the pasuk says, Chashbach says, do not make with me gods of gold or silver. The Ridarshan Lo sasun kidmus shamashai hamisham shimin lefanai. Do not make images of those things which serve before me, which refer to the celestial bodies. So you see from here, you're not allowed to make images of the sun and the moon. So what's going on over here? Amrabaye Lo asra Torah ela shamashin she'efshar la'asos k'mosan. So Abai says no. What it means is you can't make images that are, for lack of a better term, what we'll call lifelike. Things that resemble exactly the things that they're supposed to resemble. In other words, let me say differently. You're not allowed to make images when those images literally are exact replicas of the actual celestial bodies. So says, Lo yase Adam, or it doesn't have to be celestial bodies. Let's see, for example, this is very interesting. Lo yase Adam bayis tavnis heichal. So it says, it's such an interesting idea. Imagine a person is building a new home, right? So a person says, you know what, to me, I really miss the Beis HaMikdash. I'm going to build a house that looks like the Beis HaMikdash. That's what I'm going to do. I've got the dimensions. I've got a good, nice piece of land. I'm going to build myself a Beis HaMikdash. The Gemara says, beautiful. Only one issue. It's Asr. It's Asr. You're not allowed to replicate the Beis HaMikdash for your own personal uses. Or Achsadra Tav Nisula. Fine. I'm not going to do a whole Beis HaMikdash house, but I'm going to do a Beis HaMikdash antechamber, right? I'd like a nice entranceway. So I want the entranceway of my house to resemble the ulam, the antechamber of the Beis HaMikdash, or chatzar tavnis Zara, or I want to make a backyard that's like the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, or shulchan tavnis shulchan. I want to build a table, right, a dining room table that looks like the table in the Beis HaMikdash, or menorah tavnis menorah, or I want to build a menorah that looks like the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash. In all of these cases, it is asr. It is asr. Now, what you can do with menorah, this is very halacha l'maisa for us. Aval hu oseh shel hey v'shel vav v'shel ches v'ches. What you can do is you can make either a 5-branch, 6-branch, or 8-branch menorah. What can't you do? V'shel zayin lo ya'aseh afilu shel shaminei matachos. Shabbos says incredible. Just a menorah tangent for a little bit over here. But again, you cannot make a 7-branch candelabra. Why? because that's what they had in the Beis HaMikdash. So again, Rabbi say that's why in our celebration of Hanukkah, why can you do it? Because it's 8. Because Rabbi say, by the way, interestingly enough, some are makbid. This is actually dafka not to call what we have a menorah, but to call it a Chanukiah. Right? Why? Because calling it a menorah is, I don't think people really know, people still call it a menorah, but it's interesting just to point out that some are concerned that it will look like what you're constructing or what you're utilizing is a replica from what was done in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, the truth is, it's not really a concern, because it's clearly not a replica, because in the Beis HaMikdash they had 7 branches, and our menorah has 8 branches. Okay, point over here is, you're not allowed to create a replica. You must listen to this. Afilu shashar minei matachos. Now you might say to yourself, but one second. The menorah in the Beis HaMikdash was made out of gold. So here, if I'm making my menorah out of silver or out of copper, brass, whatever it might be, the Gemara says no. You can't even make a 7-branch candelabra out of a different material. Why not? Supposed to get ready for this. You can't even make a wooden menorah out of 7 branches, or a 7-branch wooden menorah. Why not? Get ready for this. Kiderech sha'asu beis chashmonai. Because again, making a wooden menorah would be like the same type of menorah that the Chashmonaim made. What? What does that mean? What Hanukkah is coming early this year? What does that mean that the Chashmonaim made a wooden menorah? We're going to say, get ready for this. Rashi says, Malchus beis Chashmonaim bosai. Get ready for this. Get ready for this. Malchus beis Chashmonai. Listen to this. Asur b'mikdash shel eitz. This is absolutely wild. Everyone thinks that the kunz of the Hanukkah story is that the Chashmonaim came to the Beis HaMikdash and they couldn't find oil. However, there was a much bigger problem than no oil. Do you know what else was missing? There was no menorah. There was no menorah. The menorah was made out of solid gold. It was carted out of the Beis HaMikdash long before. So the Chashmonaim come back to the Beis HaMikdash. The Chashmonaim come back to the Beis HaMikdash, and everything is defiled, and there's no menorah. So yeah, there's no oil, but there's also no menorah. So what do they do? Look at Rashi. Aso b'mikdash shel eitz li'achar shetimu yuvanim es ha'heichal v'notlu kol kelav v'gavra yad Beis HaChashmonai. So again, when the Chashmonaim come back to the Beis HaMikdash, they had taken away all of the utensils. The Gemara says, and when the Chashmonaim came back, v'nitzchum Rabbi Yehuda darsh le'beribuy mi'uti v'asisim riba. Fine. So back to the Gemara for just a moment. So both say, when the Chashmonaim came back to the Beis HaMikdash, there was no menorah. So the Gemara says, Amru lo mishamraya? No. Shipudin shal barzel hayu. In fact, the first year, they did not make the menorah out of wood. Rather, what did they make the menorah out of? Shipudin shal barzel. So literally, what shipudin shal barzel? Iron spits. Or otherwise stated, what do they make the menorah out of? Their spears. Their spears. The menorah of the Hanukkah story was not a gold menorah. The menorah of the Hanukkah story ultimately, again, was made out of their spears. So the Gemara says, then what happened? The Gemara says, Shipudin shal barzel hayu, v'chupan beba'atz. They coated it with tin. Ba'atz is tin. So they didn't just want to use spears. They coated it with tin the first year. Heshiru. Following year, or sometime later on, they got a little more money. Asam shal kesef. They made it out of silver. Ultimately, again, chazru ve'eshiru. They got a little more money. Asam shel zav. They made it out of gold. I will say, I just want to point out to you just the dramatic thing. It's a totally different narrative for the Hanukkah story. So when the Chashmonaim walked into the Beis HaMikdash, there was nothing there. There was no oil. There was no menorah. There was nothing. But a brave group of Jews decided to say, you know what? Let's figure this out. Let's figure this out. So they took their spears, the very instruments, the very physical instruments that they used to conquer the Syrian Greeks, coated it with tin, and ultimately, again, made it the first menorah. The Hanukkah menorah was the menorah fashioned out of the weapons of our ancestors. They finished the war. They finished the fight. They conquered their enemies, and they walked in and used those very utensils to reconsecrate, to rededicate the Beis HaMikdash. I will say, do you understand what this story is? Do you understand what this is? The story of the Jew, right? The story of the Jew is the story of walking into desolation. Finally, you win the battle. and you walk into a Beis HaMikdash and it is bereft of everything. There's no oil, there's no menorah, there's nothing. And what does a Jew do? You take whatever is at your disposal and you make it work. You don't wait until there's a perfect, beautiful miksha menorah. You don't wait until you have an endless supply of oil. But what do? You look around, you see what tools you have at your disposal, and you create light. That is the story of our people. And if it's a couple of spears and one jug of oil, you're going to make it work. You see, we make the dramatic mistake of thinking that I have to have everything perfect in order to create beautiful and luminescent results. That's not the way the Yid works. And it's not the way the life works. I will say, people who wait for perfect circumstances in order to accomplish spend their life waiting. But people who take imperfect moments and try to squeeze out perfection from them, those are the people who live accomplished lives. And those are the people upon whose shoulders we stand. We stand upon the shoulders of people who walked into desolation, gathered up whatever they could, and created light. That's what we've been doing for 2,000 years, I will say. And that is what we have to keep doing. Whether it's in our own lives, I will say all of us have imperfect circumstances, and we're kind of just waiting for things to come together. Don't wait for things to come together. Gather up the pieces and make light. Gather up your spears, gather up the jug of oil, figure it out, and make something great out of your life. And as people will say, sometimes things really feel broken, right? And sometimes things feel that they're just scattered in a state of disrepair. It's okay. It's okay. We've made light before in state of disrepair, and we'll make light again in a state of disrepair. The Chashmonaim walked in and had nothing, yet somehow they create a miraculous light that burns to this very day. I will say that's the koach we have as individuals. That's the koach we have as a nation. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Make the present moment perfect. Don't wait until you have all the perfect tools at your disposal. Take what you got and make something magnificent. Incredible. Incredible. I will say, what a schus to learn this Gemara just a few days away from Tisha B'Av, right? Because sometimes we just feel so broken and so sad that we don't have all the tools. You don't need all the tools in life to make something beautiful. You just need something. You just need a little spear. You just need a little oil. You just need a little dragon ring, whatever you're going to find. Don't slap anyone, right? You just need something. Just take what's in front of you and figure out a way to make something great. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, Mi Shari. So again, we're back to Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel, how are you making images of the moon in your study? You're not allowed to do that. Imam's not allowed to do that. Vatanya, lo sasun iti, lo sasun kidmu shamasham, misham shalafanai b'maram. So back to Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel, how are you making ultimately again images of the moon in your study? Amar Abaye said, Mem Gimel base 43b. Lo asra Torah ella bidemus dalit panim. Very interesting. No, the only thing you're not allowed to make is very interesting. The only thing you're not allowed to make is one of the actual images in the vision, in the Maisim Merkava, the image of Yecheskel. So we'll say, so again, what happened in Yecheskel's image? If you look at Rashi, Arba Panim, Pnei Shar v'Adam v'Aryeh v'Nesher l'Chai Achas. So in Yecheskel's image, he had the image. Ultimately, again, there was an entity, and the entity had four faces: the face of an ox, man, lion, and eagle. That's what you're not allowed to make. Can't make that. Gemara says, El Mustafa Bahadi Adadi El Miata Pirts of Adam L'Chudei Tishtari. So okay, so you tell me then that I can make the image of a man on my own. I can make an image. So the Gemara says, Alamatanya. Why did we learn? Kala Pirtsufos Mutar Chosme Pirts of Adam. No, we just learned before that. What? We'll say that you can make any image you want, but you can't make an image of man. Image of man is us. What's going on over here? I'm Rav Yehuda, Rabbi Yeshua. I heard from the Shir of Rabbi Yoshua, Lo sasun iti. I'm going to say this is beautiful. How do you vocalize? Now again, the pasuk is Lo sasun iti Elohei kesef Elohei zav. Right? Do not make alongside of me gods of gold or silver. There's a prohibition to fashion Avoda Zara. Interesting enough, Rabbi Yoshua in Shir, he vocalized it a little bit differently. This is so beautiful. He says, Chishbaruch Hu says, Lo sasu osi. don't make images of me. God says, don't make an image of me. How do you make an image of God? We'll say, get ready for this. Lo sasun osi avashar shamash and shari. We'll say, what does it mean to make an image of God? That's the prohibition to make an image of man. How do I know I'm not allowed to make an image of man? Kadosh Baruch Hu says, don't make an image of me. What's the image in this universe that most resembles HaKadosh Baruch Hu? It's us. I'll say it's incredible. It's incredible. The image in this universe that most resembles the Ribono Shel Olam. It's not the sun, and it's not the moon, and it's not the ocean, and it's not the heavens. It's you, and it's me. It's us. We're the thing in this universe that looks most like the Ribono Shel Olam. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu said, "We'll say, you understand what that means? I look like God. You look like God." That the responsibility and the privilege that carries with it. So when the universe, by the way, so when the sun, the moon, and the heavens look at us, what they see is, they see HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sometimes the challenge is when we look at ourselves, we don't see HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the problem. When the universe looks at me, it sees God. It sees a picture, a visage of God. When I look at myself, I sometimes have difficulty seeing that. So the Gemara says as follows: Ushar shamash mishari. So again, we'll say, so we're a little bit going around in circles over here. Are you allowed to make images of other celestial beings? Like, are you actually allowed to make an image of the sun, the moon, and the stars? Tanya, we learned lo sasun iti, so sasun kidmu shamashayam misham shelafanai b'maram. It doesn't just refer to man. You're not allowed to make an image of the sun, the moon, and the stars. To which the Gemara says, kigon ofanim usrafim v'chayos hakodesh umalochi asharis. Ultimately, what does this include? You can't make images of malachim. Can't make angelic images. Amar Abaye lo asra Torah ella shamashin shebemador ha'elyon. Ultimately, again, the only thing you're not allowed to make are literally, again, those celestial beings that live in the upper heavens. Now, both saying, I remember again, what lives in the upper heavens? So apparently that's some of the malachim. The sun, the moon, and the stars are in the lower heavens. So perhaps you're allowed to make them. The Gemara says, one second, is that true? That you're allowed to make images of things that dwell in the lower celestial levels? Vatanya, we learned, Ba'asher b'shamayim l'rapos chamo u'levana kochavim u'mazalos. Ultimately, again, Pasuk says, you're not allowed to, Asher b'shamayim, right? You can't go ahead. The Pasuk literally again, Lo saseh lecha pasel v'chol tmuna asher b'shamayim mima'al v'asher ba'aretz mitachas. So again, Asher B'Shamayim teaches me that I'm not even allowed to go ahead and make images of the sun, the moon, and the stars. The Gemara says, B'Shamayim Mima'al, Asher B'Shamayim Mima'al Rabos, Chama Ulavana, Kochavim Mazalos. Mima'al, above, L'Rabos, Malachi Ashares. You can't make images of Malachim. Kitanyahi La'ovdam. No, when we're talking about that, that means to worship. You can't worship the sun, the moon, and the stars. To which the Gemara says, one second, Ila of dam. If you're talking about worship, afilu shilshul katan nami. You can't worship anything, I'm saying. You're not allowed to worship anything that's not HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even a little insect. The Gemara says, Einachinami, you're right. The Gemara says, Umiseifa dekran nafka. We're not from the end of the pasuk. V'sanya, asher ba'aretz l'rabos yomim unaros. When it says you can't worship something on the earth, that it comes to include even the seas and the rivers. Harim ugavos, mountains and valleys, mitachas, underneath, l'rabos shilshul katan, even a little worm. You're not allowed to worship. Vasiya gredasa mishari. So we'll say. So remember again, we're having difficulty getting clarity on this. What's our problem? On one hand, the Mishnah told me that amongst the images that are always idolatrous, what's in that category? Sun, moon, stars. Or was it stars? Stars. No, sorry, sun and moon, dragon, right? So now both say we have a problem. What's our problem? Rabbi Gamliel is my problem. Why? I love him, but why is he my problem? Because again, he had images of the moon in his studies. We're just trying to figure out how you're allowed to do that. How do we reconcile all of this? To which the Gemara says, as follows. Good. Vasiya gredasa mishari. So I don't understand. Now the Gemara is suggesting maybe it's just worship that's problematic, but creating it, right, making it, fashioning it is fine. Is that true? The Gemara says, "Vatanya we learned lo sasun iti lo sasun kidmus shamasham misham shelafanei b'maram kigon chama ulavana kochav mazal." It's not true. Even just fashioning it, even just making a replica of the sun, the moon, and the stars is problematic. So we'll say once again, how is Rabbi Gamliel doing this? Which Gemara says, Gemara answers, Shalom Gamliel, Tachirim Aslo. No, not a problem. Rabbi Gamliel didn't make it himself. Rather, again, I will say what happened. He had a guy, right, who was the guy. It was an akum. He had an akum commission it. An akum made it for him. The Gemara says, "Ivaha Rav Yehuda da'achirim asulo." I will say, but 1 second. Rav Yehuda, as we're going to see in just a moment, Rabbi Yehuda had a ring, a signet ring, made for him, right, by an akum. Shmuel said to Rabbi Yehuda, "Shinina, sharp one." That's a compliment. Samu eine didin, right? Go ahead and literally do something to what's the word? To diminish the image. So again, Rabbi Yehuda had a ring, a signet ring. There was an image ring, right, that somebody made for him. And Shmuel said, "I don't like it. I don't like the image." Right? Not that I don't like the image. I don't like an image. Shouldn't have an image. Therefore, do something ultimately, again, to partially destroy, partially diminish the image. Now, so what do you see from here? That even if an akum makes it for you, it's still what? It's still problematic. So it's very nice you had someone else make you the image of the moon, but it's still problematic. I'll say first white line, Hassam, no. The ring case of Rabbi Yehuda was a different case. Why? Bechosmo boleit or mishum chashada. Ultimately, we'll say, a signet ring that has an image is a different issue. This was a signet ring that had a protruding image. And the problem that Shmuel had is, Rabbi Yehuda, if you walk around like this, it looks like Avoda Zara. Look, it's a protruding image, looks like Avoda Zara. What does this mean? This time, I'll say end of the first white line. This is an interesting case. Tabas shechosma bolet. If you have a signet ring, right, a ring with an image, and the image itself protrudes, so in other words, it sticks up from the ring, then ultimately, again, asr lahanicha umutar lachtomba. You're not allowed to wear it, but you are allowed to sign with it. Right? Interesting. Why can't you wear it? You can't wear it because it looks like Avoda Zara. Why does it look like Avoda Zara? Because the image is protruding. People can see the image. But you can sign with it. Why can you sign with it? This is very interesting. Because if you sign with it, right, if the image is raised, then when it's signed, it's what's the word? Depressed? Indented? Indented, right? Because the image itself is indented. So that's fine. Conversely, chosma shokea. If you have an image ring, and the image on the ring itself is indented or depressed, right? Ultimately, mutar la'anicha, you're allowed to wear it, v'asar lachtomba, but you can't sign with it, right? You could wear it because no one could see the image really because it's depressed, but you can't sign with it. Why? Because it'll create a raised image. Okay, so the Gemara says, so the point over here is, in that case, so watch what's happening over here. So remember, we have a very simple question. Rabbi Gamliel, how are you allowed to have the moon images? So the latest answer the Gemara wants to suggest is he didn't make it. An akum made it for him. But 1 second. Just because an akum makes it for you, that doesn't mean that it's mutter. After all, Shmuel had a signet ring made from an akum, Rabbi Yehuda had a signet ring, and Shmuel said, I don't like that. I want you to blunt that image somehow because it doesn't look right. And it's going to look like it's a raised image, and it's going to look like you're worshiping Avoda Zara. Because we're choshesh that. The Gemara says, 1 second. There's so much happening over here. Umi chashin l'chashada. Now, the Gemara says, 1 second. Are we choshesh that people are going to think that Jews worship Avoda Zara? Right? So in other words, just understand what's happening over here, right? So, right, Rabbi Yehuda gets his brand new signet ring, right? He's all excited. Shmuel says, I don't like it because it's a raised image. People are going to think you're worshiping idolatry. So Gemara says, 1 second. Are we really concerned? Also, you know what? We're going to stop over here for today. I'm going to leave you a little bit on a cliffhanger. But the Gemara is asking a fundamental question. Do we actually assume, or do we have to be concerned that people will think that Jews are worshiping idolatry? So again, cliffhanger, great story in the shul, in a big shul in Meretz that we'll see. The Beit Knesset, the Shafi Yosef. Continue tomorrow, and halacha l'maisa on this as well. Shkoyach. Maybe actually tomorrow I'm going to use the microphone. I'm going to use it. Doing it.
What the thing about Miyai is not necessarily about something. I think he said that, right? That being Miyai doesn't necessarily.